People are addicted not always to substances, but to a state of being.
This is Monterastelli, and welcome to the Tapping Q&A podcast, recorded live to tape from Williamsburg in Brooklyn. This is episode 239, originally aired September 21st, 2016. Hi everyone, I hope this finds you well wherever you are and whatever time of day you're getting a chance to listen to this. Thanks for spending some time with me today. Today we're going to be talking about EFT, addiction, and the 12-step process. Before we jump into that, just a couple of quick reminders. Reminder number one, on the website, we have a free 10-part guide on how you can use EFT to eliminate self-sabotage. There are videos, there are audios, there are tapping scripts, there's instructional articles. Each of the parts will be delivered to you every few days, so you're not overwhelmed by the information, allowing you to integrate and use each of the parts as they show up. All you need to do is go to tappingqa.com to sign up. If you happen to be listening to this interview in the website, up in the right-hand corner, just click on the big blue button, and you will have an opportunity to sign up for that absolutely free of charge. Second, the Tapping Q&A podcast is sponsored by Pain Relief Miracle. Pain Relief Miracle is an all-natural spray that works with cuts, bruises, scrapes, arthritis, muscle pain, joint pain. It is all natural, and because it is all natural, you can use it on your favorite animal companions. I had dinner the other night with a friend of mine who has a dog that is dealing with a really bad joint issue and brought her along a full bottle, and she was super excited. It is in my medicine cabinet, and it should be in yours as well. You can receive 33% off your very first purchase of Pain Relief Miracle. All you need to do is go to tappingqa.com/pain. That's tappingqa.com/pain. for all of the information on how you can get 33% off your first order. Finally, make sure you check out the podcast archive. Even though this is episode 239, we have bonus episodes and double episodes and all sorts of other stuff. This is actually the 301st free audio that you can find in the archive. If there is a topic that you would like to tap on, if there's someone in the tapping world that you'd like to hear interviewed, it is probably in our archive. All you need to do is go to tappingqapodcast.com and you can access the entire library absolutely free of charge. You can also download the app there. You can subscribe in iTunes, Stitcher, TuneIn, Google Music Play. The whole array of stuff is there. There's so much good free content that is waiting for you. Take advantage of it. It doesn't cost you anything but a little time to provide some peace and some healing in your life. So today I have a conversation with Gloria Arenson, and we talk about addiction, EFT, and the 12-step program. That it was something that she was involved with for a really long period of time. And you'll hear in her story how she personally got connected with it and professionally got connected with it. So over the course of this, the beginning part is a conversation about addiction and different ways that we can think about and approach addiction. If you're looking for some specifics, back in episode 234, we talked about specifically porn and sex addiction. The beginning of this conversation is more general, talking about lots and lots of different types of addictions. The second half of the interview is then how can we take tapping and use it alongside to enhance the 12-step program if you are doing that. We actually step into a couple of the steps very specifically and how you can use tapping in those steps. As a word of warning for people who are listening to this in a public space or a space where you might have small children around, as we talk about addiction and the different ways that it manifests itself, we talk a little bit about how sometimes one type of addiction will lead to another type of addiction, and we talk about some things of a slightly explicit nature. So if you have some small children who you don't want to hear that conversation with them there, stick in some earbuds or come back to this one at another time. So without any further ado, here is my conversation with Gloria. Addiction is one of those words that sometimes the word is used in a very specific clinical sense, and sometimes it is a word that someone will just kind of throw off really casually. Oh, I can't go to the holiday party because I'm just addicted to chocolate. When you use the term addiction, what do you mean?
I mean that people have a craving for something or some behavior that they become powerless over. And I am guilty of also calling it compulsion, because I think that's part of the vocabulary today of how we talk to each other. But the addiction part really has to do with what happens in the brain. And we know now that the cravings arise from an imbalance in the dopamine and serotonin in the pleasure circuits of the brain. So that's a more technical explanation. And when the dopamine and serotonin go out of balance, it creates stress. And it's that simple. Now, the stress can be physical, but the stress can often be emotional.
And so when you say make someone be powerless, what does powerless look like in this circumstance?
Powerless is reported to me. In other words, I don't see a person go out and eat 2 dozen cookies.
And so then, I mean, it's very clear. There are things in the culture, alcohol, drugs, things like that. A few weeks ago, we talked about sexual and porn addiction on the podcast. In your practice and you're working with clients, what are the things that you have seen that create this chemical imbalance that lead to the state of powerlessness? Like, what are the different things that people show up with?
There are love addicts. There are thrill seekers. There are people who become compulsive about exercise, work, masturbation. And I'll just throw in another little story of a client who was 7 years sober in AA who came to me because she was bulimic. Wonderful person, worked a beautiful program. She came for a session one day, and she said, I'm so upset. I don't know what to do. I become addicted to masturbation. And I was kind of taken aback because no one had shared that with me, of my eating disorder clients. And I said, well, let's take a look at this. What's going on? Because this was a new behavior. And so I said, one of the things about compulsion and about craving is that people are addicted not always to substances, but to a state of being. And there are 3 things that people who are addicts or compulsive crave unconsciously. One is relaxation, one is arousal, and the other is oblivion. Now, we know that in drugs, there are uppers and downers. But as I examine with my client this new addiction to masturbation, I said, tell me more about it. And so she said, well, when I have an orgasm, I just become oblivious. And so here is someone who had a very stressful life, a very stressful job. She was also getting ready to get married. So there's a lot of stuff going on in her life. And this was how she took her time off. And I thought that really made sense. It made sense. And of course, today we are all addicted to texting, of course, which can be really, really dangerous as people cross the streets looking down at their iPods, their whatevers, different hobbies. And believe it or not, I consider procrastination a compulsion because it's a compulsion to not do. And procrastination gets people into a lot of trouble. They don't pay their bills. They don't show up on time. They can get fired from jobs. Their relationships can fall apart, and they feel powerless over that. There are also people who are collectors, and they, again, I don't know if you want to call it an addiction on a biological level, but I did have a neighbor who collected Japanese net skis. the little beautiful little carved things. And when I went into her home, you could barely walk in because she had her walls lined with beautiful glass cases filled with net skis. And that was a very interesting kind of hoarding. Many people with eating disorders are shoplifters. That's another compulsion. Self-mutilation. Eating disorders, people often cut themselves.
You mentioned in there this idea that these sorts of compulsions arise out of a desire for relaxation, arousal, or creating a state of oblivion. When someone is experiencing these sorts of behaviors, compulsive behaviors, is it typically because they're always seeking the same one of those each time? Or is it a circumstance that when they're seeking one of the three, the compulsive behavior is the tool that they're reaching for?
I'm not a scientist, but my guess is that it's on a biological level. Because people who and this is all unconscious, and as I said, I really think it has to do a lot with brain chemistry. So people who are, their bodies are seeking relaxation, and I think that's carbs bring you relaxation, rarely will want to skydive.
Okay. So they're longing for one of the three, not all of the three, and that's the one that's consistent.
That's consistent, but it's not conscious.
Oftentimes, one of the things that's associated with compulsive behavior is not just the fact that they're doing the compulsive behavior, but they do the compulsive behavior in a really magnified way. It's not that I am craving some chips. It's that I eat every single chip that is in the household, or I will clean out all of the sweets in the fridge. What does it look like, or what is going on when someone engages in the compulsion and it goes from this desire to something that looks like a binge?
I think a binge is defined by the person. I don't think you can say a binge is eating a dozen cookies. I've had clients for whom a binge is 6 cookies and other people where it's 4 dozen cookies.
Okay.
So it's a very personal thing. And certainly people who use any kind of drug, even alcohol, at some point you're going to pass out or you're going to get very sick, which will limit your binge. So I don't think we can measure. We can say, okay, you now have binged because. And
so then what are then the parts of a binge if it's not measured by the magnitude of what we're engaging in?
First, there's a craving. Mm-hmm. There's a trigger, and the trigger is the type of stress that's going on, and we're unconscious of it. So, as I described my client who was the alcoholic bulimic who started to masturbate, she was getting ready to get married. That's stressful. I mean, she was happy, but people who are planning a wedding are often very stressed. She had an extremely stressful job, which she loved, but it was very stressful. And then there were other life stresses. So the first thing is the trigger. Something triggers you. And it can appear to come out of the blue, but it's some kind of stress. And that's what creates what I call the desire decision. Now, the difference between a non-addict and an addict is that a person can say, and what I call a normal eater or drinker or a normal person, can say, well, wouldn't it be nice to have some coffee and a donut? Yeah. And then they go on shopping. But for an addict, it's, I want it, I'll have it. Oh, wouldn't it be nice to have a donut? Yes. So there's no going back. Once the decision is made, it's made. And I once had a client who only ate after dark, but he made the decision during the day at work. So he knew, I want it, I'll have it, but he was able to postpone it till 10 o'clock at night. So there's the desire, the decision, and eventually or immediately the action of doing it, which is followed by the hangover. Now, the hangover, of course, when you use alcohol, is very unpleasant, but I call it hangover because it's remorse. Or it's if a person eats a lot, of course, they may feel sick also. And if a person spends a lot, they're going to get their credit card bill and go, oh my God. So there's the hangover, which is followed by the letdown. I did it again. Oh God, I hate myself. Which is then followed by, I'm back where I started. Mm-hmm. Nothing has changed. My life still sucks.
And as we were getting ready for our conversation today, and we were emailing back and forth, one of the things that you talked about was how we can integrate, as we're responding to addiction, how we can integrate EFT into 12-step. What was your original connection or interest in the 12-step process?
I was born into a family where my mother was a wonderful cook and baker. Oh boy, was she a baker. And I like to say that her motto was, don't cry, darling, have a cookie. Mm-hmm. So her message to me was, that's how you manage your feelings. When you're little, you cry. But when you're an adult, you feel sad, you feel mad, you feel depressed, disappointed. And so she taught me, don't cry, have a cookie. So as you can imagine, that became quite a problem for me as I grew up. And I went to my first diet doctor at the age of 11 because my mother didn't realize the connection. Mm-hmm. She just kept feeding everybody. And my cousins, of course, still tell me how wonderful she was and what a good baker she was. So as an adult, I was still going on diets. I was still trying and failing because, of course, I didn't know what I know today. And eventually someone told me about a new organization called Overeaters Anonymous and took me to a meeting, and my whole life changed. I went, oh my gosh, this gorgeous woman got up. And she was beautiful. And she was telling her story. And she said, to think I will never eat cherry pie again. And I went home and had a binge because she used the most terrible word, never. Mm-hmm. Never is forever. So I stayed away for a while, but eventually I went back. And this was I think Overeaters Anonymous was only a year old then, very young. And of course, I just jumped in. Wonderful people, wonderful program. And we had a lot of support from local AA speakers who would come and inspire us. And I was very successful. And what happened was eventually I got to be on the board of Overeaters Anonymous, and I became chairman of the board. And we were having a lot of trouble getting organized. And one day it dawned on me that we were choosing people to hold office because of the length of time that they had kept their weight off. So in other words, how long had they been sober? But when I looked at their lives still sucked. So I thought to myself, this is weird. And of course, at that time, I had never had therapy. And so it took me a while to realize that not overeating is a little different from getting your life in order. And I think that eventually is what led me. Well, I left. I also moved away to another city. But I left still puzzled about what keeps people sober. And they can stay sober, but because the 12 steps are wonderful, and they ask you to admit you have a problem and take care of your life, but I think that there was some lack there, because there was something called their step 10. So after looking at your life in great detail, making changes, you continue to work this program, and when you have a problem, you practice step 10, which is the step where you continue to take personal inventory. And the way that you do that is you pick a sponsor. And the sponsor is someone you look up to, has the kind of success you want, and who you have a good relationship with and you think really is a wise person. And so I was in a terrible marriage at the time, and I was constantly miserable about that. And I would write a 10-step about my husband, and I would call my sponsor, and I would read it to her. And then we would discuss it. What other steps do I need, to practice? Now, I wasn't overeating. I was just miserable. Well, after about the 20th 10th step, one day she said to me, you keep calling me with the same thing over and over again. She said, I'm so tired of hearing this. It's always the same. And I took that to heart, and I hung up, and I thought, she's right. What do I, wow. So what I did was I began to write my 10 steps and then say, what do I need to do about this? Now, at that time, thank goodness, I was also in therapy, but it helped me to begin to inch forward by seeing what was stressing me and creating my own solutions. And after, at some point, I came across a very amazing book about spirituality and compulsive eating, written by quite an amazing woman. And it changed my life, and I actually got to meet her and have a relationship with her. And she was very special, and she said, everything I have is yours, use it. And I started to teach, and I taught the combination of what I had learned in the 12th step with the other, some of which was spiritual things, and try to help people help themselves in a new way. Not to leave 12th step. I still think 12th step is extremely important. But to then keep learning. And I became a therapist.
So then how do we take the tool of EFT and integrate it into the 12-step process?
Okay, so let's start with step 1, where people admit that they're powerless and their lives are unmanageable. And just recently, I had a few people come in who told me this. And I said, have you gone to any AA meetings? And they said, no, I don't want to go. Everybody there just gossips, or no, that's not for me. And there they are. They're at step 1 and they can't take the first step. So that's the place where I challenge, I listen to what their excuses are, and can use EFT for the excuses. Even though I don't want to go there because all those people just sit and gossip, that's not for me. I like to say I'm exploring that issue now. So I try to challenge those people right off the bat, because part of that may be a message that says, I'm a loser and I'm not supposed to succeed. And I don't know that, because each person has their own stopper that stops them from even getting started. And so those people, unless they become so upset and willing, there has to be some pain that makes them willing to try. So I start right there. But only a few people won't even get started. But those who do get started usually are practicing a program. But as I explained before, they have sobriety, but is their life changing? And that's why I meet them, because they come in with job problems, relationship problems. A lot of people are still mad at mom or dad, other fears, anxieties, all those things. And so that brings us to step 4, because step 4, and I am skipping over the spiritual part because I'm not a minister. I am someone who always asks my clients what their spiritual life is, and I try to encourage, because most people do have spiritual, some kind of spirituality or desire for spirituality, so I encourage that. But step 4 is the biggie, because that's where people make a searching and fearless moral inventory of their lives. In other words, all the junk that they have collected. And that's, I think therapy is part of that personal inventory. So what I did was I created a little guide sheet, and I have people fill out an inventory, asking them to list who and what in their lives are still hurt, they're still feeling a lot of pain over. And when they come in, then instead of going to their sponsor, I see psychotherapy as helping people go through and clear out the wreckage of your life. And so they can bring their list in, and we can go over. And, one of the things I think that triggers the craving is anger. I know for myself, I once wrote an entire anger inventory at everyone and everything I was angry about. So if a client comes in, we go through their life. Who or what from your entire life, when you think of that person living or dead, still bothers you? And then we start, you can use EFT to consider each of those people. Even though I am still furious with my dad. And then it leads them to, what about your dad? All the times he did this, all the times he did that, the times that he beat me, the times that he left me, the times that he disappointed me. And we go through everyone, teachers, ministers, neighbors, friends. You want to clear out all of that emotional pus. And so sometimes people need to do more, we can do a certain amount of clearing. But since addictions are kind of a chronic problem, if it starts to come back, then there must be something else in your life that's still bothering you. So we go through not just people, but events. Are there traumas? Some people have traumas in their life, even in childhood, medical traumas, losses, loss of a parent, loss of a pet. And I've known people who had a pet that got run over or something. These people are 60 years old, but they're still mourning the pet that got killed when they were 10. So step 4 is the most important thing. And I think when people come for therapy, even if they're not addicts, looking at that as a guide can be really helpful in clearing up things that are triggering them to have problems in relationship or something like that. And so then, as part of that, of course, in the steps, they talk about using a spirit, asking God to remove all these defects of character. And I think that's beautiful for people who have a strong spiritual belief. I don't push it on anybody. And I think the same for step 8, which is to make a list of all persons we had harmed and become willing to make amends to them all. And I think that EFT can help us with that, because when a person is tapping on some anger toward a brother or a sister or a neighbor, and getting rid of that anger, and often as that anger disappears, there can be some awareness, some new awareness. he couldn't help, my brother couldn't really help acting like that, because when he was growing up, such and such happened in our lives, and we moved to another city, and he lost all his friends. Wow, I can understand why he's such a bitter person. Stuff like that. Tapping can help when people are all by themselves and they don't have a sponsor nearby to call in the 12-step.
And I think one of the things that you point out really clearly there, that's not just in looking at the steps, but looking at anything, is that we have these great frameworks that give us the opportunity to understand what healing and transformation can do. And then bringing EFT to any and all of those steps gives us an opportunity to almost supercharge that step, or to allow that step to happen easier or quicker or with power, because not only are we intellectually trying to work our way through something like that, we're also giving ourselves the ability to continually to emotionally clear, so we see what's going on more sharply as we're doing the steps.
Right. Well, for me, EFT is, it's almost like it's tattooed in my cells, because I just, when the going gets rough, as they say, the more you tap, the more you will tap. And that's why when it comes to addictions and compulsions, and people are always falling off the wagon, it's stressful to live a life where you know that you have something that can kill you, like an addiction. And once you have these steps, it's so powerful. It's just so powerful because you can take control over your life. Now, the good thing about the 12-step program is that you can surround yourself with people who are ahead of you, who are good role models, who will share with you and be there for you, which is so important. But once you it's kind of like riding a bike. At first you don't know and you keep falling down, but once you know how to ride, it's automatic. So once you know that my stress is what affects my brain, which creates cravings, then I need to look at my stress, not my addiction. See, a lot of people are like white knuckle trying not to eat or trying not to spend or trying not to whatever it is. But if instead we look at our stress every day, because that's the heart of it. It's going to do something to our brain, and we can't control that. But we can control our stress. So the less stress we have, the better our chances are, or an addict's chance is, of being able to say no.
Yeah, it's one of those things that the better the resource state we're in, the better the choice we make. And when we recognize it, becomes much easier. And the other thing it does is it gives us this place of being able to start making transformation and responding before we get to the place where we find ourselves in that binge cycle. Excellent. Well, Gloria, thank you very much for your time.
It's been a pleasure. It's been a pleasure.
I hope you enjoyed that very thoughtful conversation about how we can approach addiction, and a little more information about it, and how EFT and the 12-step program can integrate into all of that. If you would like more information about Gloria and the work that she's done and the number of books that she has written, all you need to do is go to tappingqandapodcast.com, click on the link for episode 239. There's also a link in the show notes if you happen to be listening to this in some sort of podcast player. If you'd like more information on addiction and EFT, in episode 234, we talk about sex and porn addiction. In episode 111, we talk about smoking. And in episode 78, we talk about addiction to emotions. So go to tappingqandapodcast.com to go anything from our archives. And again, you can subscribe to the show in TuneIn, in Stitcher, in iTunes, in the Google Music Play Store, where I checked once again, we are still the #1 EFT podcast in the Google Music Play, because we are still the only EFT podcast in the Google Play area. Also, Go to tappingqna.com/pain to get 33% off your first order of Pain Relief Miracle. I love the stuff, and I would only have them sponsor the show if I really believed in the product. If you have a question, a comment, a topic that you'd like to see us cover in the future, all you need to do is go to tappingqna.com/contact. If you're on the website right now, you can click on the contact link up above. If you happen to be using that fancy schmancy Tapping Q&A app, if you click on the menu, there's a contact section. You can send me an email right from your mobile device. You can even leave me a voicemail message. I would love to hear from you so that we are making sure as we produce shows in the future, we continue to serve you. The Tapping Q&A podcast, this is Gene Monterastelli. I hope you have a great day, and I'll talk to you real soon. Bye-bye. The Tapping Q&A podcast is copyright Gene Monterastelli, Tapping Q&A 2016. All views expressed by guests are those of the guests and not necessarily of Gene Monterastelli or Tapping Q&A.